Response to King Yaakov's video, Lunar Sabbath Nuked, review. Hiram, yashra'al, servant of Yahuwah and of the Master Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad in the captivity, greetings. Well, shalom, brothers and sisters. The purpose of this video, as we wrap up this 10-part series, is to review each of the parts and each of the points that I made within each part of this video series, and to also ask some challenge questions at the end of each part. And I believe this is important because it's just like playing any sport. You not only have to have a good defense, you have to have a good offense as well. And so that up until now, it's been pretty much defense, me defending the lunar Sabbath. But when it comes to the Roman seventh-day Sabbath defending itself, see, that's what convinced me that the lunar Sabbath was true. When I saw that I didn't have enough positive proof from the scriptures in order to stand on the traditional Roman seventh-day Sabbath. I had all kind of debunks for everybody else. I had all kind of debunks for the lunar people. I had all kind of debunks for the Roman Sunday people. But I didn't have much positive proof for my own belief. And so if you are still not convinced that what I presented to you is right, and if you still hold to the traditional Roman seventh-day Sabbath, then please carefully consider the questions that I'm going to put forth to you, because it'll give you an opportunity to see if you really have a leg to stand on in your own belief. Now, let's forget about what the lunar believes. Let's forget about what the Roman Sunday people believe. Let's talk about what you believe and allow yourself to be challenged. So, the first part was the creation account. The points I made in it were, number one, the seventh day does not necessarily mean a perpetual 7-day count. Second point was that time began before the sun and the moon were made or appointed or arranged on the fourth day of creation. The third point was that the 7-day pattern, the pattern of 6 working days and the 7th-day Sabbath, the 7-day pattern is emphasized throughout the scriptures rather than the 7-day count. And so the challenge question I have for this part is, where in Scripture does it say that the Most High created a perpetual week during creation week? Now, perpetual meaning that it goes up to 7 and then it restarts and it just keeps repeating itself like that throughout all eternity without any kind of interruption. Where in the scriptures does it say that the Most High did that? Because like I said, we're not shown what happened the second week, the fourth week, the fifth week. We're only shown what happened the first week. So where in the scriptures does it say that that week was created to be perpetual? Where? Now, the second part was the appointed times. And in the appointed times video, these were the points that I made. First point was that the moon was appointed for the appointed times and also functions as a signal. Now that's important because the 7th-day Sabbath is the very first of Yah's appointed times that are listed in Leviticus chapter 23. Second point I made was that the moon was appointed for my appointed times, meaning Yah's appointed times. There are different appointed times throughout the scriptures, and not all of them are regulated by the moon, but Yah lists all of his appointed times in Leviticus chapter 23. And then the third point I made was that the Sabbath and the festivals are 2 different types of appointed times. That's why they're listed differently in Leviticus chapter 23. And so, the challenge question for the second part here is, if the Sabbath is an appointed time that is not regulated by the moon, then why is it listed first in Leviticus chapter 23 as one of my appointed times, which are Kodesh gatherings. Why is it listed like that? Why does it have so much in common with the rest of Yah's appointed times, which all of us agree are regulated by the moon, and have so little in common with these other appointed times that are not regulated by the moon, that people try to extract the Sabbath out of Leviticus 23 and put with that other group? So why is it listed like that? That's the challenge question for part 2. Now, for part 3, the 3 classes of days. First point I made was that we have the 6 working days. We talked about that, and the gates are closed in the inner court on the 6 working days. Number 2, on the Shabbat, the gates are open. And then number 3, the gates were open also for the new moon. Why? Because the new moon was, is, and will always be a non-commercial day of worship. In fact, we see even in the kingdom age that it's not going to be a choice for people. Yah said, from one new moon to another, from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come before me. What that tells me is that people aren't going to have a choice. So this is a special day, brothers and sisters. And so the challenge question I have for this part is this. In fact, I have 3 challenge questions. Now, it's a 3-part question rather, and that is that the Jericho March, according to Yasher 88:14, began on the first day of the 2nd month. So it began on the new moon. Also, according to the lunar count, they finished the march before the Shabbat. Remember, it was 7 days, and for 6 days they marched around the city once, and on the 7th day they marched around 7 times, and the wall fell flat, and they invaded and took over the city. Now, they finished on the 7th day of the 2nd month, and so that would not have conflicted with the Shabbat, because remember now, according to Exodus 16:29, they were to abide in their tents, abide in their place on the Shabbat. The Jericho March was an offensive battle. They weren't defending themselves like in the Maccabees where they'd be attacked on Shabbat and they fought back. No, this was an offensive battle, and they were supposed to stay in their tents on the Shabbat. But according to the lunar count, there's no conflict with the Shabbat. So my challenge question is this. According to the traditional Roman 7th-day Sabbath count, which of those 7 days was the Shabbat of the Jericho March? Remember now, all 7 days they're engaged in this offensive battle. Which of those 7 days was the Shabbat? All right, next part. First week of manna. The 3 points I made was, number 1, the manna fell on the 16th of the 2nd month. Second point was that the first commanded Shabbat in Scripture fell on the 22nd of the 2nd month. That's the first time we see the children of yashra'al actually commanded to keep the Shabbat. Now we know that the Shabbat day was there from the beginning, from Bereshit or Genesis 1:14. But the first time we actually see them commanded to keep it is in the 22nd of the 2nd month. Now the third point I made was we are only told what happened that week. And all else is speculation. To say that they had 6 days of manna, they had double on the 6th day, none on the 7th day, that same pattern repeated itself perpetually for 40 straight years, that's speculation. Because what did they do on the new moon days? What did they do on the feast days? See, we don't know. We're not told. We're only told what happened that week. And so, brothers and sisters, the challenge question I have for this part is, where in Scripture does it say that the 7-day cycle of the manna falling for 6 days and ceasing on the 7th repeated itself without interruption for 40 years? So if you disagree with what I just said, that was something that didn't repeat itself perfectly just like that for 40 years, where is your scriptural proof of that? Where? All right, next part. Daoud and the shewbread. So, the first point I made was that Daoud left Yehonathan on the second day of the month. That's when they parted company. You know, they met the day before the new moon, and they met again on the day after the morrow, which was the second day of the month. Now, point number two is that there's no clear reference to the 3 days that Daoud mentions to the Kohen, to the priest, when he says that him and the men have kept themselves from women for about, see, he even said about now, so it could have been 3 or 4, for about 3 days since we came out. Well, when did they come out? There's no clear reference in the scriptures to that. We can only assume. Now, the third point I made was that the shewbread was old and the day was not necessarily the Shabbat. All that we're told was that bread was taken from before Yah so that the new bread could be put in, but that was old bread. We don't know how old that bread was. We don't know how long it took the priest to eat up all of that bread. And so to say that definitely that day was the Shabbat, that is an assumption. And so the challenge question, and there are actually 3 challenge questions for this, and that is, when did Daoud gather his men? Because remember, he talked about him and the men that were with him, that they had kept themselves from women. Where were those men in chapter 20 when he met with Yehonathan? When did he gather those men? Second question, when did they come to Nob? I know that Nob was a short distance away, but still he had to gather his men. When did he come to Nob? And then the third is, how old was the shewbread? Do you know for sure that that day was the Shabbat? Do you know for sure it wasn't the day after? So there are too many variables about the Daoud and the shewbread account to say that you for sure have an instance where the Shabbat did not fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th. Too many variables, too many assumptions to be made. Now, Festival of Shavuot. Now, I realize that in this video I introduced some things that you probably hadn't seen before. But, brothers and sisters, what I presented was backed up by Scripture, backed up by that nature, the agricultural cycles, and it's even backed up through history, which I will bring out at a later date outside of this series, and because I'm going to be putting out some supplementary videos, but they're not going to be a part of this series. I want to go ahead and close this series out. But anyway, the first point of the Shavuot video is that Shavuot is the first fruits of wheat harvest. That's the most important point because everything else falls behind that. Now, the second point was that the scriptural wheat harvest is in the summer and not the spring. And then the third point was the correct starting point of the 50-day count is not on the day of the wave sheaf, but it's actually on the day that the 7-week count is over with, the morrow after the 7th Shabbat. That's the starting point for the 50-day count. That's the only way you can make it line up with the scriptural wheat harvest. So, the challenge question I have is this. Where in the scriptures do we find even one clear case of a wheat harvest in the spring and not the summer? So all truth is to be confirmed by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. I don't even need 2 or 3 witnesses. Give me one clear case. We presented clear cases where the scriptural wheat harvest was in the summer. Just give me one of a scriptural wheat harvest being in the spring and not the summer. That's the challenge. Now, last day of Sukkot. 3 points we made. Sukkot is a 7-day festival, not an 8-day festival. A 7-day festival with a solemn assembly on the 8th day. That's how it's always laid out in the scriptures. So, And number 2, when Yahushua stood up on the last day of the festival, in John 7:37, he stood up on day 7 of the festival. And then point 3, the Shabbat fell on the next day, which was the 22nd, so there's no conflict. And so the challenge question is, where in the scriptures do we find one clear case of the 8th day being called the last day of Sukkot? Where? Because we have to have that as our foundation if we are going to say that Yahushua stood up on the 8th day and said what he said. Now, the heart of the earth. 3 points we made is that there's no clear scriptural link of the heart of the earth to the grave or Sheol or to the underworld. Number 2, the Messiah's experience during this time mirrored Yonah's experience. And so that it wasn't just the 3 days and the 3 nights he was comparing, but also the experience Yonah had, which was distress and suffering. And then also the experience that Yahushua was to have 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And then also that the third point is the count begins when the Messiah's hour had come, the hour that he was delivered up into the hands of sinners. We also determined that all of this took place in Yerushalayim. So Yerushalayim is the heart of the earth. And so the challenge question is, where in the scriptures is the grave or the underworld referred to as the heart of the earth? What kind of scriptural foundation do we have for calling the grave or the underworld the heart of the earth? Now, 3rd day resurrection. First point I made was that the Hebraic 3rd day is with inclusive reckoning. I gave multiple examples of this, that if you're in any part of a day and you're counting days, that whole day counts. And you'll see that through the scripture references that I put. And number 2, the Messiah was impaled on preparation day, the preparation for the 7th day Shabbat, and he rose on the 1st day of the week. And then the 3rd point was that the high Sabbath mentioned in Yochanan or John 19:31 was the 7th day Sabbath. That's what was great or high, and I explain why it was great or high. So the challenge question, 2 challenge questions. Number 1, where in the scriptures does the 3rd day ever mean after 72 hours? If we're going to interpret it like that, then we have to have a scriptural foundation. Number 2, where in the scriptures is the 1st day of unleavened bread ever called a high Sabbath or even a Sabbath of any kind by itself, apart from the 7th day Sabbath? Where's our scriptural foundation for that? And so the last part of this video series was the first fruits, wave sheaf. First point I made was, thus it is written that the Messiah would rise from the dead the 3rd day. Not just rise from the dead, but suffer and then rise from the dead the 3rd day. I made the point that it is written. And then number 2, first fruits foreshadowed the resurrection and first ascension of the Messiah. So there are very few people that dispute that. Most of us agree on that. But the 3rd point I made was that first fruits foreshadowed not just the resurrection, but the 3rd day resurrection. And that was the point that I drove home, because the wave sheep offering was always offered on Aviv 16, which is the morrow after the Sabbath, that it foreshadowed the 3rd day resurrection, showing that the 7th day Sabbath always fell on Aviv 15, every single year without exception. Those are the points that I made. And the challenge question is this: besides first fruits, where else could it be written in the scriptures that the Messiah would suffer and rise from the dead the 3rd day? Where else? If he didn't mean first fruits, what did he mean? Now, you could point back to Yonah, but that's not a perfect typology. Yonah was swallowed up by the fish because of his rebellion. And Yonah didn't literally die in that fish either. And so, besides first fruits, what else could the Messiah, what else could he have been talking about? So, brothers and sisters, This is the review. These are the challenge questions. Meet the challenge. And with that, I will say, Shalom.